Right, before we get into this, I'm going to set the tone. First and foremost, I would say I am a long-term Deontay Wilder skeptic. I've had certain people on my videos comment that I'm a Deontay Wilder hater. Whatever your interpretation of that, let's put it this way. I am not convinced by Deontay Wilder. I'm not convinced by the level of opposition he's been in with. What I would say is Wilder has slowly but surely improved. And the guy who took out Audley Harrison, windmilling all over the ring, is not the same fighter as the guy who outboxed Bermane Stiverne over 12 rounds and recently took out Johan de Hapaz. Don't get me wrong, neither of those performances were flawless. Both of those performances highlighted to me that Wilder is still relatively early in his development and there are gaping big holes for him to improve on. Having said that, the Deontay Wilder that we have today is a formidable fighter. He's 6'7", he's athletic, he's proved he can go 12 rounds. We know he has above average KO power. And whilst concerns remain about Deontay Wilder's chin, hasn't he answered those concerns somewhat? You know, we had the feeling that Deontay Wilder was a guy who could get dropped by a journeyman. Deontay Wilder would get dropped wearing headgear in the amateurs. Having said that, Deontay Wilder went 12 with Bermane Stiverne, a guy who took out Chris Arreola twice. You know, now Chris Arreola isn't, don't get me wrong, he's not in an A level of competition. But Bermane Stiverne can crack a bit. You know, Bermane Stiverne is the kind of fighter who I personally expected to beat Deontay Wilder. And, you know, Deontay Wilder got the job done. Deontay Wilder took some shots that night. And won the fight fair and square. You know, Deontay Wilder's an improving fighter. And whilst his resume is not what I'd like to see for a WBC heavyweight championship, you've got to admit that outside of Klitschko, outside of Povetkin, there are not actually too many heavyweights whose resumes are leagues above Deontay Wilder's. You know, I'm Tyson Fury's, I'm one of his biggest advocates, right? But Tyson Fury's best wins are Steve Cunningham and Derek Chisora. Are those wins actually leagues above beating Johan de Hapaz, Eric Molina, Malik Scott, Bermane Stiverne? You know, maybe Tyson Fury's resume is better. But is it miles better? You know, it's the same sort of level. You know, Deontay Wilder's beaten the opposition to be in the conversation of top 5 in the heavyweight division, certainly. Now, Alexander Povetkin is a guy who is immensely favoured by the boxing hardcore. You know, us hardcore boxing fans who watch YouTube videos and that sort of thing tend to rate Povetkin. You know, Povetkin's got a really, really good resume. He carries very, very big power. And the way he fights, he's come forward, he's all action, he's entertaining. You know, he's a guy who is popular, and for obvious reasons why. But my question is, are we wrong in dismissing Deontay Wilder in this fight against Povetkin? You know, I've always looked at this fight as quite a simple fight, and it's a fight that's been talked about now for about a year, so I've discussed it on several occasions. I think Wilder throws a jab, Povetkin dips under the jab, Povetkin throws something like an overhand or a hook, Deontay Wilder is knocked unconscious. And a lot of boxing fans have that view. Let me say, I am one of you. I have shared that opinion for a long, long time. But now I actually look at the fight, having recently watched Marius Wach versus Povetkin, and having recently seen Deontay Wilder versus Johan de Hapaz, I'm less certain. For me, I'm going to say it, this is a 50-50 fight. But what I would also say is, at this stage, I view Povetkin's chance of winning that fight as a puncher's chance. It's a very, very good puncher's chance. Povetkin hits extremely hard. Deontay Wilder has questionable defence. Deontay Wilder's chin, you know, is rumoured to be terrible. Who knows? My point is, Povetkin has a very, very good chance of knocking Deontay Wilder out. But do you really see him outpointing Deontay Wilder? I mean, stylistically, let's say Deontay Wilder's chin isn't as bad as we've suspected. You know, it's the kind of chin that can stand up to Romain Stavern, you know. Maybe his chin isn't terrible. I know Povetkin's a big puncher, but let's not forget, Povetkin's been the distance many times in his career. He went the distance against career cruiserweight Marco Huck, who was recently taken out by a fellow cruiserweight, Krzysztof Wach. He went 12 rounds with Mariusz Wach last night, and the fight was only stopped in the last round. You know, I mean, I think what Wilder brings to the table is he could cause Povetkin similar issues to what Wach did in the early rounds last night. But Wilder's capabilities would really exacerbate those issues. Wilder's jab is twice as good as Mariusz Wach's. You know, his jab is a lot faster, a lot snappier, and in my opinion, a lot more powerful. Wilder's also starting to develop some sort of punch variety. You know, I've always viewed Wilder as a very, very basic 1-2 fighter. But notice the way he dropped Eric Molina with a lovely lead left hook. It was Vladimir Klitschko-esque, it really was. Notice the way he actually fought on the inside against Johan Depar. Put the fight on him, got on his chest, threw uppercuts. You know, I am a long-term Deontay Wilder skeptic, but I have to give credit where it's due. And I'm seeing vast improvements in Deontay Wilder. You know, I'm seeing different levels to his game. I'm seeing him, I saw him fight on the back foot against Romain Stavern. I've seen him fight on the front foot in the majority of his fights. We know he's got a jab and a big right hand, but he's also got a lead left hook. Is his inside game as bad as we've always thought? You know, he looked semi-capable, at least against the pot. Now, Povetkin is not a hard guy to work out. We all know what Povetkin's going to do. He's going to trudge forward, he's going to be low, he's going to try and dip under the jab, and when he dips under the jab, he'll throw a jab to your chest to push you back, and then unload with left and right hooks. That's what he did. Vladimir Klitschko was able to completely negate Povetkin's game, basically, by two tactics. One, keep him at bay with the jab and fight him at range. I personally don't see why Deontay Wilder couldn't try that tactic. And two, when Povetkin eventually does get inside, hold him, lean on him. Now, for me, Wilder is not as experienced and strong as Vladimir Klitschko on the inside. I'm not saying Wilder's going to be able to close down Povetkin like Vladimir was, because Vladimir showed supreme experience and supreme strength to do that. But what I would say is, Mariusz Wach caused Povetkin some issues in the early round by teeing off from range. Don't get me wrong, Povetkin won nearly every round. I'm not being critical of Povetkin here, but Mariusz Wach caused him some issues stylistically. I still think Povetkin struggles against big men. I mean, look at the guys who he's been taking out. You know, the Mike Perez's, Carlos Takams. They're good fighters, they really are, but they're shorter opponents. For me, Povetkin was clueless against Klitschko. He had a terrible game plan, and he had no way of adapting that game plan. You know, the fact that he had no plan B and no way of bringing in new variations during that fight tells me that he's a one-trick pony. And from my eyes, Deontay Wilder can tee off on range, but Deontay Wilder's also got the athleticism to keep it mobile. You know, it's much harder for Povetkin to walk an opponent down and dip inside their jab when they're as slow-footed and as plodding as Mariusz Wach was last night. Wilder is a younger, fresher, more athletic guy who's fit and who can fight for 12 rounds. I see Wilder on the back foot, throwing the jab, keeping Povetkin at range, and if Povetkin does get under his jab, you know, Povetkin is semi-predictable. You know, all Wilder's got to do, I know he backs straight up with his chin in the air and he's susceptible to the jab, but really, all Wilder's got to do is work on keeping his hands tight and hands high. Because you know Povetkin's punches are going to be looping and coming in like that, or coming in over the top. You just got to keep your hands up, your chin down. You know, if Wilder can sort of work on that and increase his defensiveness and, you know, not be too rushing in if he ever gets Povetkin hurt, he's got a real solid chance in this fight. You know, I'm seeing this as a 50-50 fight, I really am. Previously, I was 90-10 in favour of Povetkin. I thought at some stage in the fight, Povetkin will land, and then it will be game over. But right now, I'm questioning, is Deontay Wilder's chin as bad as I've always thought it would be? And let's be honest, whilst Povetkin, I'm sure, will land at some point in the fight, isn't Povetkin slightly predictable? And can't Povetkin be outboxed by a 6'7" athletic guy? I don't mean to oversimplify it, but isn't that what it comes down to? You've got a guy who's 5 or 6 inches taller than Povetkin, with much longer reach, who's a lot younger and a lot more of an athlete, as I see it. He can move, he can box on his back foot. Povetkin is going to have to do, in my opinion, more than he did in the Vladimir Klitschko fight. And possibly more than he did in the Mariusz Wach fight last night in order to win. Because Deontay Wilder will pose certain challenges that Vladimir posed, and that night Povetkin couldn't find an answer to them. And let's be honest, Vladimir Klitschko is another guy with questionable chin. It's not just about whether the opponent's got a questionable chin. It's about whether you can land on that opponent. And whilst Deontay Wilder is imminently more hittable than Klitschko, if Deontay Wilder can move, keep his hands high, keep his chin down, and most importantly, if he can shut down Povetkin on the inside by big manning him like Klitschko did, it becomes a 50-50 fight. And this is from a long-term Deontay Wilder skeptic. I'm just recognising I'm seeing improvements in Wilder's game. And even though I'm a long-term Povetkin fan, isn't he a one-trick pony? If you were training a prize fighter to fight him, wouldn't you kind of be able to predict what he's going to do? Let me know your thoughts. I'm keen to discuss. If you've enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it. Thanks for watching.